Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
To be honest, it brought tears to my eyes.
Pipeline pushback, why a BC First Nation now opposes the Trans Mountain Expansion project. Also,
we, the jury, find the defendant, William Earl Talbot II, guilty of the crime of first-degree murder.
A Washington state man is found guilty of killing a young Vancouver Island couple more than 30 years ago. And
everybody got along. They're just like one big family.
A time of tolerance, the legacy of lessons from a Vancouver Island ghost town.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
good evening. A BC First Nation, once in full support of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, now stands in opposition.
Shwahamil near Hope says when the federal government took over the project, the new round of consultations failed them.
As the CBC's Angela Sterrett reports tonight, the community is now concerned the pipeline route will desecrate one of its ancient villages.
Just off the Trans-Canada Highway, in this forest, an ancient village once stood.
These are our sacred pit homes.
Archaeologists say there are more than 20 pit houses or traditional homes here dating back 1,400 years.
This sacred site is protected under our own sacred law, and it's so important to not only our current community members, but our ancestors.
But it's hard for them to forget what happened here almost 70 years ago.
Diluted bitumen is running under my feet in the original pipeline. It was built in 1950, and archaeologists and community members say it destroyed numerous ancient pit houses. Now they fear the new pipeline will destroy even more.
That's because the proposed route runs directly through the sacred site.
To be honest, it brought tears to my eyes, to my community. You know, there's a lot of uproar throughout the community.
Before the federal government bought the pipeline, community members felt confident in Kinder Morgan's consultation process, even signing a benefit agreement with the company. James bought heavy equipment and reached out to contractors to start the work. But then the project changed hands.
The construction methods were going to change within our area, and we turned to an opposition role.
Shwahamil says they raised flags at consultation meetings, worried construction would destroy the artifacts. But they claim the now federally owned company looked the other way. Not true, says Trans Mountain CEO.
And over the last 6 months, I would say, is a far greater awareness by us, and I would suggest perhaps the community, to the importance of that site and the degree to which we need to protect it.
For elders in Shwahamil, the site is more than an ancient village.
One of the important reasons that we need to take care of them now is because of the residential school experience, the loss of our culture, loss of our language. And so here's an opportunity for us through archaeology to be able to interpret and study our past.
To prove to the new pipeline owner that a village once stood here, they needed to chop down trees that grew over the site. What's more, the community's lawyer says their Indigenous rights might not matter at the end of the day.
The federal government has deemed this a project of national interest, so in that circumstance, it might actually just trump their rights.
Still, he says the Shwahamil have more than just one tool in their toolbox.
So they already have a live Aboriginal title action that covers this entire corridor.
That means they could file an injunction to stop construction.
I am 110% confident that we're going to win this.
Shwahamil is just one of 4 First Nations planning to challenge Ottawa's reapproval of the project in a judicial review. Angela Sterrett, CBC News, Shwahamil First Nation, near Hope, BC.
A man has been found guilty of killing a young Vancouver Island couple more than 30 years ago in Washington state.
For decades, their deaths remained a mystery until a new form of DNA testing led to the suspect. CBC Vancouver News at 11 host Dan Burrett joins us now live with more. So Dan, who's involved here?
Let's start with the suspect, and a warning for you. Some of these details are disturbing. William Earl Talbot II was arrested after a DNA test came back as a positive match to DNA collected from the crime scene. In November 1987, 18-year-old Tanya Van Cuylenborg and her boyfriend, 20-year-old Jay Cook, took what was supposed to be an overnight trip from Saanich to Seattle. They were never heard from again. Their families organized search parties. Van Cuylenborg's body was eventually found near Bellingham. She was found partially naked and shot in the head. Cook's body was found underneath a bridge, beaten and strangled. Detectives were stumped for decades, but last year they used a new technique to analyze DNA left at Van Cuylenborg's crime scene. Experts from a lab in Virginia worked backwards through a family tree and identified Talbot's grandparents. They used a public database match and they got Talbot. Eventually, detectives took a DNA sample from a discarded cup that Talbot had used to make a positive ID. He was 24 years old at the time of the murders. He's now 56. His lawyer called him a blue-collar worker who worked in construction and as a truck driver, and he lived a quiet, unremarkable life. Today, a jury in Washington State announced its verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, William Earl Talbot II, guilty of the crime of first-degree murder as charged in count one.
I didn't do it.
Verdict form 2.
You heard him say, "I didn't do it" there. Now that's two counts of first-degree murder he's been convicted of. This case is significant because it tested the use of this type of genealogy to identify suspects. It's prompted a lot of discussion over crime fighting and DNA privacy issues. Talbot is set to be sentenced on July 24th. Mike, Anita?
All right, Dan, thank you.
Victoria police now say a fire that burned an historic Victoria hotel to the ground was set on purpose. The blaze broke out on May 6th at the Victoria Plaza Hotel, sending smoke billowing high from the four-story building. The investigation is now focusing on the whereabouts of Mike Drager, the building's caretaker. Drager hasn't been seen since the fire, and he was known to sometimes stay in the closed and vacant hotel. Anyone with information about his whereabouts is asked to contact Victoria Police.
A convicted child sex offender is expected to be out of prison and spending time in Abbotsford this weekend. Ex-St. John, New Brunswick City Councillor Donnie Snook is currently serving an 18-year sentence for child exploitation-related offenses. As part of his personal development, he has been granted escorted temporary absences. Saturday is believed to be the third time this month he's been outside of prison, with several more planned. The former youth pastor pleaded guilty in 2013 to a number of charges, including sexual assault and sexual touching of a minor, as well as making child pornography.
Meanwhile, in Vancouver, police are warning a high-risk sex offender posing a danger to women will be living in the city. 40-year-old Cameron Eugene Rattel was convicted of sexual assault against someone under 19. He has finished his sentence, but is believed to be at a high risk of reoffending. He's described as 5'8" and 200 pounds with a large build and a shaved head with brown eyes. He uses hearing aids and is known to target women 16 to 25 years of age. Well, as we head into the long weekend, many of you may be gassing up your cars to head out of town, but you also may be in for a shock. Prices have spiked at some Vancouver gas stations. A jump to $153.9 a litre at some locations, while the rest of the Lower Mainland seems to be hovering around $1.30 or $1.40. Lowest prices are in Greater Vancouver right now, can be found in Abbotsford.
It was 25 years in the making, and today the federal and provincial governments signed an agreement in principle for a treaty with the Datidat and Pachidat First Nations. The joint agreement lays out the elements that will be included in separate treaty agreements with each of the two First Nations, which are located on the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. Some of the elements include ownership and cooperative management of land and resources, harvesting rights, and cultural protection.
This is the most robust agreement in principle we've seen in the 25 years, 26 years of the treaty process. So I'm very optimistic the final treaty is just around the corner.
Further negotiations will include the preservation and enhancement of the West Coast Trail and Pacific Rim National Park Reserve, which are both located in Datidat and Pachidat lands.
We've a follow now to an exclusive story we brought you yesterday. BC's health minister now says a decision will be made soon on whether to expand the availability of what he has called a life-changing drug.
But critics are saying soon isn't soon enough. 13-year-old Miles Ambridge is one of about 30 people in BC with spinal muscular atrophy, SMA-A, a genetic disease that progressively robs people of their strength. But a gene therapy drug, Spinraza, can stop or even reverse the illness. But it costs $700,000 for for the first year of treatment. 4 other provinces have negotiated secret, cheaper deals and now provide the drug to SMA sufferers, but BC lags behind. The CBC's Eric Rankin broke this story yesterday, and he joins us now.
So, Eric, you grilled Health Minister Adrian Dix on this. Is he giving any idea as to how soon the decision will come?
No, he says, in effect, they're working on it. It's in the hands of a clinical review panel, and he says he won't interfere politically. Here's some of our exchange.
That's where the process is now, and other provinces, I think, we're just a week away from other provinces. So we're reviewing the application of Spinraza in BC now. That advice will come forward and a decision will be made, and I'd expect it to be made soon.
4 other provinces have come through very clearly, not on a political basis, but on a health basis, and they've given the drug to the small amount of people in each of the provinces that need this.
And I guess what I'm saying, Eric, is that we have an evidence-based process in BC. We're going through that.
Earlier you said soon. How much longer do they have to wait?
Well, as you know, other provinces just announced this. The most comparable other provinces really in most recent time. I don't believe it's been acted upon yet in other provinces. They've made the announcement, so they put out press releases. I don't know that. And so we're, of course, working actively on this.
You've also spoken with the mother of Miles Ambridge. How does she feel about the further delay?
Well, Anne Belanger is angry. She asks, what other evidence is there to review and ponder and pore over? She says she wants it approved now because this is a progressive disease. Her son Miles and others with SMA are getting worse, and she says every day counts. Mike, Anita?
Eric Rankin, thank you very much.
The family of a young Syrian boy whose image made global headlines after he drowned on the Turkish coast 4 years ago says it is heartbroken a film is being made about the boy's death without their permission. The photo of 2-year-old Alan Kurdi captured the tragedy of the European migrant crisis in 2015. Alan, his brother, and mother all drowned after their inflatable boat capsized while trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea. Alan's aunt lives in Coquitlam. She says no one involved in the film's production asked the family permission to tell the story. She didn't even know a film was being made until Alan's father contacted her from Iraq.
You know how much pain this has caused us when we are trying to move on in our life? You know, the way he was telling me about it, that my son cannot come alive unless, he said to me, maybe it's a miracle, he's gonna come alive. He's a traumatized. You can't put this pain to him. You can't. Alan was 2 years old. He doesn't even speak. And he's dead. He's dead.
And we will have more from our interview with Tima Kurdi tonight on CBC News at 11 with Dan Burritt.
Well, if you traveled through Vancouver International Airport on Monday, there's a chance you may have been exposed to the measles. The BC Centre for Disease Control says a passenger with measles was on 2 different YVR flights on June 24th. Philippine Airlines Flight 116 from Manila arrived at YVR at 5:15 that evening. The ill passenger then took WestJet Flight 458 from Vancouver to Manitoba. Anyone on these flights or in YVR's international arrivals, customs, or baggage areas at these times may have been exposed to the virus. The measles is highly contagious, and if you think you were exposed, you should call your doctor.
And it'll soon be mandatory for parents and guardians to show proof of immunization records for students enrolled in BC schools. This is part of the vaccination status reporting regulation, which goes into effect July 1st. Goal of the first year of the program is to help parents get their children up to date on shots by the end of the school year.
It increases our ability to respond during an outbreak, as it allows health officials to quickly identify those who are under or unimmunized.
The province says most parents are already in compliance and don't need to do anything more, but those with children who have incomplete or missing records will be contacted by their health authority on how to provide that information.
A Vancouver Park Board commissioner says she's been inspired to propose a motion for a bench mural program after a local woman painted a memorial bench that is now being removed. Julia Goodkova painted the bench located near Kitts Point to honor her late partner, Colin McKay, who died in 2015. She was then notified by the city that it had to go because it impeded with the uniform look of the park. But one park commissioner sees this incident as an opportunity to change that.
We're just all humans, and we love to honor, people who have passed or people who have done something special in our lives. So when we can do that in a way that, also can beautify the city, why not?
The proposal will be drafted this weekend in time for the next park board meeting on July 8th.
Well, a high-rise project on West Broadway in Vancouver is dividing a neighborhood.
As Andrea Ross reports, it may bring much-needed affordable housing to the area, but critics say it's all too tall.
If the 28-story tower is approved, it would be the tallest building on West Broadway by a long shot. And that has some neighbors at this open house worried.
28 floors will essentially destroy the neighborhood.
The city previously approved 16 floors for the site, but in May, the developer resubmitted a zoning application for 28, 20% of which would be set aside for affordable housing. Some residents say that's a good start.
If I have to be honest, I don't know if the 28 floors are enough.
Mayor Kennedy Stewart says the city's moderate income housing policy can encourage private developers to build affordable housing. The developer promises 53 of the units would be reserved for households making up to $80,000 a year.
People are just starting out their careers, starting with living wages, they're having places to live, and again, $900 for a studio apartment in that part of the city is unheard of in the current market, and so we really need these projects to go ahead.
Stewart says the city has to work with developers to ensure new projects include affordable housing. People can provide feedback on the project online. Andrea Ross, CBC News, Vancouver.
Brett is here for our first check of the forecast. You were a popular guy in the newsroom today. Everybody wanting to know what the long weekend's going to be like.
Yeah, and I feel like I was extra popular because I actually had good news to pass along. I don't know how people would feel if I didn't have good news, but no, don't worry. I will be back to give you your full and complete long-range forecast for the long weekend coming up in the next one. But right now, I wanted to cover some active weather that's going on across the province. Now, right now, outside of the studio and where I am, there's definitely not a lot of active weather. Current temperatures looking more so into the mid to upper teens. And that's fairly widespread across the region, but there definitely is a lot of cloud cover, and we can see this on our satellite and radar map, actually. You're going to notice that there really isn't a whole heck of a lot that's going on in terms of actual radar-related returns, but we do have a lot of cloud in the area. But the active weather is actually in the other part of the province. This would be into the interior and getting into the northern portions of BC. I wanted to show you a map right here. If it does decide to load any time now, it would be about some watches and warnings that we do have across the region. You can see that BC is not the only place right now. I have quite a few across Alberta, where in fact there was a tornado warning fairly recently. But of particular interest, we have a lot of watches right now into the north, including Prince George to Dawson Creek, and down toward the southern interior. This is where I have my eyes on specifically, because we are looking at some very heavy rainfall coming through parts of the Okanagan. So if anyone is headed out that way right now, or you do know anyone in that area, there is still a lot of lightning, so be concerned for that. But hey, if you're spending the long weekend in Vancouver, I've got some good news for you coming up.
Good stuff. Thanks, Brett.
You're welcome.
Okay, and we always like to remind you that you can take us with you wherever you're going this long weekend. All you have to do is download the free CBC Gem mobile app.
And you can watch the news and all of CBC's programs streaming and on demand. We're also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Just search for CBC Vancouver.
After the break, we are taking you to a Vancouver Island ghost town ahead of its time. The 100-year-old Sikh temple still stands as a symbol of tolerance. Well, here's a story with a Canadian flavor, right in time for the Canada Day long weekend. It involves the purchase of a canoe using currency found only in this country.
So can you guess where he got it? CBC's Alex Soloduca was there for the big reveal.
$941 in Canadian Tire money. It took Thomas Turflaw 3 years to save, but he finally has enough to cash in for a brand new canoe. Turflaw says the goal started as a joke on social media, but once his friends and family heard about it, they all began donating to his cause. So did complete strangers.
For some reason that I don't really understand, it just kind of like resonated with people. Like it wasn't just that they liked it or they thought it was funny, but they wanted to like contribute. And I was like, I got letters in the mail from people I didn't know with a note that would say, hey, I'm friends with so-and-so and I heard about your idea and I wanted to help out, and there'd be like 80 cents in there, you know, like, so people wanted to participate.
If you shop at Cdn Tire, you'll probably remember being handed back some of these bills at the checkout. They've been floating around in wallets and drawers since 1958. The company has now switched over to a card program, but will still give you bills if you aren't signed up. But collecting a briefcase full of 5 and 10 cent notes takes a while. Turfoth reached his goal this month when he turned 40. His friends surprised him with $500 in Cdn Tire money. When he walked up to buy his canoe with it, the cashier's jaw dropped.
I was not expecting that at all. Yeah, you pressed the wrong button on the till and everything, because I've just never seen that.
I don't know if I can think of anything more Canadian. It's very, I don't know, it's like really hoser. But I'm not dating myself too much. But yeah, it's like, I feel like the guys from Fubar are gonna show up or something, you know? It's like really, I don't know if it could happen anywhere else.
Turfoth was all smiles after buying his canoe and even has $150 in Cdn Tire money left. He says he plans to spend it on a cover for his new canoe. Alex Saladuka, CBC News, Regina.
I think I hear the guys in the control room. One of them says that they also bought something with Cdn Tire money.
$750 worth of something, though? Wow, that's pretty impressive. I can never find mine. It's like a drawer here or, you know, a drawer there. I don't know.
You'll have to do a big house clean, see what you can buy.
Yeah, come up with a lot. Buy a canoe or something else.
Something else. Stay with us. We will have more on what's making headlines here in BC in just a few moments. The BC government is now reviewing recommendations from a coroner's jury that came out late yesterday.
The inquest was looking into the accidental overdose death of a Vancouver Island teen. Tanya Fletcher now on what, if any, changes in policy could be made.
I will bear the burden of Elliot's death for the rest of my life.
Brock Urchuk's 16-year-old son Elliot fatally overdosed last year. Fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine all found in his system. His parents said he'd become addicted to prescription painkillers following a series of surgeries stemming from sports injuries. The inquest wrapped up with several jury recommendations directed at the Ministries of Health and Education. They include more long-term residential treatment facilities for young people and earlier detection of mental illness and substance abuse within the school system.
Since I became Minister of Education, I was a bit surprised that there was never a comprehensive mental health strategy that harnessed the potential of the school system to look after our kids.
But Elliot's parents are disappointed the recommendations didn't touch on privacy policies that left them in the dark about his addiction. Their lawyer wants a review now of the decades-old Infant Care Act, which says youth may consent to medical treatments on their own.
So if we're talking about access to safe birth control versus treatment for a substance use disorder that you're playing Russian roulette with a tainted drug supply every day, the proportionality is different.
The family also would have liked to see a recommendation involving secure care.
My son being put in an environment where he is held until he's capable of making an intelligent decision. When he has his facilities back, that's what we're looking for here in secure care.
BC's health minister says these are all issues for the province to consider, but made no promises on implementing any changes.
But there's obviously concerns raised by that family and other families about how young people are treated in the healthcare system and how that treatment can be linked to other supports they have, including family supports.
The coroner is now expected to make additional recommendations in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, Elliot's parents say they will continue to fight as long as it takes.
Elliot's been dead 433 days today. The need for a father to defend his son doesn't extinguish with his death.
Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, this weekend, more than 1,000 people will make their way to a place on Vancouver Island where a ghost town is expected to come alive again.
And before the 100-year celebration of the Sikh temple kicks off, I had the chance to travel to the community of Baldy, where the lessons of tolerance instilled a century ago endure. Long after the houses fell into ruin and the families moved away, people still visit the only remaining structure in a tiny community turned ghost town.
The Gurdwara is still here, and that is still a place we look forward to coming to it on the weekends and for worship.
Brothers Pudge and Sarge Bawa were born and raised in Baldy, west of Duncan.
Well, our house was right here.
They say the 100-year-old Sikh temple is a symbol of what the town once stood for.
The Japanese, the Chinese, the white boys, and everybody got along. It was just like one big family, and everybody helped each other.
Baldy was unique. If stories of racism and conflict exist, they're hard to find.
It was quite harmonious, and everybody was welcome.
Just look at the faces in this school photograph. Think of how unusual this was back then. And the diversity wasn't only displayed through classroom friends and co-workers. There was romance, too. Joan Mayo married the eldest son of the town's founder, Mayo Singh. Not your typical union in the early 1950s, but if that seems significant, there's more. Her father-in-law, an Indian immigrant, created the town in 1917, 30 years before South Asians could even vote. That's the foundation Baldy was built on.
All the different nationalities and how nobody paid any difference. It was a wonderful way to grow up.
Joan describes Mayo Singh as an entrepreneurial man who recognized the economic opportunity of BC's forests.
We were looking for a place on the island where there would be timber. And the story that I was told is that 35 men came over and they built a little mill here and made a little town.
Named after a village in India and in Canada, centered on this mill.
And from what I understand, anywhere there's a mill, there's always a school. So that's what happened to it, why it became a little village.
But the work eventually died down with the mill's closure, and by the 70s, most families moved away. The houses that once stood here slowly vanished. A sad reality for those with roots in Baldy, but in some ways, the heart of the community lives on.
We're going to have a 100-year celebration.
A celebration where they take comfort in knowing there's a key piece of history that remains, continuing to represent what the town once stood for.
Yeah, a piece of history that I don't think many people really probably know about, well, until now.
I had to ask our resident know everything about BC man, Justin McElroy, and he didn't even know the town existed.
Nice story. Time of tolerance, for certain.
And the celebration is happening this weekend.
Lots of fun. Well, police are often questioned about use of force. Today, Vancouver police gave reporters, including our Tina Lovegreen, some hands-on insight into their training. That's coming up.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
This sacred site is protected under our own sacred law, and it's so important to not only our current community members, but our ancestors here.
A BC First Nation near Hope, once in full support of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, now stands in opposition to it. The community is now concerned the pipeline route will desecrate one of its ancient villages.
William Talbot of Washington State has been found guilty of killing a young Vancouver Island couple more than 30 years ago. Tanya Van Coulenburg and Jay Cook disappeared on an overnight trip to Seattle.
Well, police are often questioned about their use of force, especially when so many people are now recording interactions on their cell phones.
Today, Vancouver police gave reporters, including our Tina Lovegreen, some hands-on insight into their training.
It's a training session.
Get down.
With fake guns.
Okay, there's more work to be done here.
Actors.
Calling for backup, an ambulance.
And journalists acting as police officers.
Red, end scenario.
But the pressure of such a high-intensity situation feels very real.
Okay, breathe, relax. Just stand over here, gang.
At the Vancouver Police Department's Tactical Training Center, the idea is to share how quickly situations can escalate and how officers are trained to deal with them.
It's pretty heavy. Here we go. Okay, you went in first. Coming in.
Hi, police. The force invited the media to try out the different tools officers use on the beat, like a taser.
Hold it right there on her. Yeah. And you squeeze that trigger nice and slowly. She's just acting. She's not really feeling anything.
Again, it wasn't real, but...
So you can see.
Terrible. Reporters were also tasked with how to deal with someone resisting arrest, though none of us could figure it out. Now that most people can record an interaction with police officers on their cell phones, officers are under much closer scrutiny.
You might be surprised that force is used probably less than 1% of the time. But that's the stuff that usually gets talked about, that's the stuff that's not always pretty, and that's the stuff that is sometimes controversial.
But police say cell phone video rarely shows the full story.
And we encourage people to film, we have no problem with that, but as long as they're doing it from a safe distance.
And they train their officers to act in a way that is reasonable in the eye of the law and the court of public opinion.
Perform in an area where you'd be proud to be seen on TV the next day, and your children, your family, your spouse, your partners would say, hey, good job, nice work.
The force is focusing on less lethal options and training for when someone is in crisis. The majority of their calls are at the Granville Entertainment District or the downtown east side, and many of the calls are related to mental health.
Whether it's someone getting stabbed, whether it's threatening, whether it's someone in a suicidal mindset, mentally health issues, they were going to calls with knives every day.
Situations can change quickly. Decisions need to be made in seconds, which is why the right training is so important. Tina Lovegreen, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, not looking so great out there at 6:34 on this Friday evening. BC Place upon us. Improving conditions for your Canada Day long weekend, though. Brent has the forecast coming up.
Extreme weather alerts have been issued across much of Europe as a heat wave broils pavement and leaves homes, offices, and people sweltering.
As Thomas Dagler reports, emergency calls are increasing across the continent, and heat-related injuries and even deaths have been reported in many European countries.
The most dramatic scenes today are playing out in Spain, where hundreds of firefighters are battling a huge wildfire for the third day in a row. These are the biggest fires the Catalonia region has seen in 2 decades. 20,000 hectares, or 50,000 acres, are said to be at risk. That's like 4 times the size of Charlottetown, to give you a sense. In France today, the National Weather Service has activated its most extreme heat warning for the first time, with temperatures in the south of France expected to hit 44, breaking a record set much later in the season in August. The French Prime Minister has said what makes this heat wave so extreme is not only the intense heat, but also how unusually early this is coming in the season, indeed, even before the usually hotter weeks in July and August. This heat wave's covering a huge area, with Poland, Germany, and the Czech Republic all breaking record temperatures for June. The warning from the French Public Health Service is that this can prove dangerous to everyone and can indeed prove deadly. The Prime Minister is warning people to heed warnings. They've closed thousands of schools there in France. They're actually allowing people to run through the public fountains in Paris, which is a rarity. And even here in England, which has been spared from the heat wave until now this week, a 12-year-old girl has drowned in a river, prompting the police to warn against jumping into the water, as temperatures even here in England are expected to rise into the 30s tomorrow. Thomas Dagler, CBC News, London.
Pretty
toasty.
Scary stuff.
Yeah, very scary.
Let's bring Brett Sutter home now to look a little bit more into how hot it actually is getting in France.
Yeah, I mean, this was just absolutely unprecedented. I mean, I knew that it was going to be hot, but I think this is going to shock absolutely everyone. France, the country, has set a brand new record for the hottest temperature ever recorded in its territories, and that was this Friday at 4:30 in the afternoon, 45.9 degrees in Galag-les-Monsieux. For context, 45.9 degrees, this would be equivalent to a hot August day in Death Valley, California. That's what that normal temperature would be like. So you can imagine it is just absolutely sweltering in there. Now, fortunately, a lot of France is going to cool down to the 30s, believe it or not. But where's that heat still lingering, as we just showed? That is still going to be in Spain. So Madrid, Zaragoza, and even Barcelona is going to be getting into some very high temperatures at that point in time. Now, for us, it is a long weekend. It is Canada Day, and you probably want to know how that is going to be going down. Saturday, this is the one to be watching for in the morning. Expect a few clouds here. So if you wake up and you think that it's going to be a bad day, it won't, at least I hope. Clearing is going to be expected throughout the afternoon. And then Sunday, sunny and warm conditions. We are looking at 24. That is going to be the nicest day of the weekend, objectively speaking. And for Canada Day, a few clouds is in the forecast, but aside from that, it is going to be positively beautiful. Now, over the next few hours, it is worth mentioning that we are expecting just a few scattered showers across the lower mainland and getting into the North Shore Mountains. Aside from that, though, Saturday is really just going to be about the cloud. Again, maybe if you're doing some hiking up in Garibaldi or somewhere around there, you could experience some heavier cloud, maybe a bit of mist, but down toward the lower Fraser Valley, it is going to be looking beautiful. This is a map that I am proud to show. I always like to talk about the fire danger rating across the province, and this is the lowest that it has been across the province since April 24th. So this is something to celebrate, really. Down toward the downtown Vancouver core, it is still in the moderate to high area, but for the vast majority of the interior, it is looking much better than that. So another recap just in terms of what we can be expecting for the next 5 days. Again, the weekend in itself, not too shabby. Saturday, a little on the cooler side, 20 degrees with some morning clouds. Aside from that, clearing nicely throughout the day, warm and sunny on Sunday, another repeat of that on Monday, and to start off the work week, maybe matching some people's moods, a few showers, it's going to be a little cooler. You have to come down from the high that is a long weekend. I know it is tough, but still not a guarantee just yet, but I would probably hold off until about then for the rain, yeah.
That's fine. I'm loving that Sunday, 24.
Yes, that is going to be awesome. Can't
Very
wait.
Nice. Very nice. All right. There is a request tonight from BC conservation officers. Please don't take wild animals into liquor stores.
Okay. The service says on June 15th, it got a tip that a man walked into a liquor store in the interior carrying a live fawn. COs later tracked the man down at a home in Invermere with the fawn still with him.
Yeah, the officer figured out that the man thought the animal was abandoned. So he took it back to where it was picked up and used an electronic call that mimics a fawn. And go figure, right away, a doe ran out to reunite with its little one.
The man who brought it into the store was actually charged with unlawful possession of live wildlife. Conservation reminds you to leave wildlife alone, even if it appears abandoned. Instead, just give them a call.
Good advice. What is killing the right whales? Scientists on PEI tried to get to the bottom of a deadly mystery off their province's coast.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
CBC Vancouver's Dan Burrett will host the 3rd annual Canada Day drumming celebration at Creekside Park on July 1st. And don't miss the Indian Summer Festival, July 4th to 14th. This year's provocative lineup features futurists, novelists, stand-up comedians, musicians, and storytellers from around the world. For more on these events, check us out online.
Scientists on Prince Edward Island are carrying out a tough task today. They are examining the body of an Atlantic right whale, trying to figure out how it died.
As Brian Higgins reports, the whale is one of 6 found dead this month in the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
Just getting the whale on shore was a job in itself. It took an hour, a backhoe, and a big strong rope that broke twice. Already a crowd of curious onlookers had gathered. Everybody's heard about these endangered right whales turning up dead in the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
You don't want to see a species like that to be, I guess, to be wiped out and whatnot. So I mean, any kind of actions that they implement to help the species. I mean, there's only so many of them left, so it is what it is, and it's kind of a shame that it affects our day of crab fishing, but in the end, I mean, we're only small potatoes compared to the small potatoes that's left for whales, right?
A Mi'kmaq elder offered prayer after it was ashore, and then the work began. Measurements of the whale's overall dimensions, preparation of field labs for tissue sampling, and once the cutting began, a strong, pungent odor filling the air.
Investigators say they aren't jumping to any conclusions about what caused the death of this whale. About 50 people are on site doing this work. Investigators say they will gather all the information, then do their best to piece together what might have happened.
Only 412 right whales remain alive worldwide. 6 have turned up dead in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in recent weeks. That's a discouraging setback after Ottawa brought in speed limits on ships and fishing restrictions in the Gulf last year.
We are concerned about this species, and if obviously it's not a sustainable mortality rate at this moment, given that there's such a small number of animals right now. If this continued on, certainly it would be very worrisome. But you know, we try to remain optimistic, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to keep doing what we're doing. So that's why we're here.
They've named this whale Comet. It's a male. When examination is complete, Comet will be buried here among the dunes. Brian Higgins, CBC News, Norway.
The Prime Minister is in Japan for the G20 summit. After today's meetings, there's a dim ray of hope for the future of Canada-China relations and for the fate of 2 Canadians detained in China. Trudeau had a short conversation with the Chinese president after one of the meetings. The 2 men spoke through interpreters and shook hands at the end of their talk. Beijing had previously ignored Justin Trudeau's request to meet with Xi Jinping, but relations seem to be improving. The outgoing Chinese ambassador to Canada now says the current difficulties between the 2 countries are temporary. He says Chinese-Canadian friendship has a deep history.
Back in our country, Ontario's government was dealt a blow today on a key campaign promise and policy cornerstone of Premier Doug Ford. The province's top court has ruled Ottawa's carbon tax is constitutional. In a split decision, it said the federal government's carbon pricing scheme has the critical purpose of fighting climate change. Ontario had been arguing the levy is an illegal tax. It's one of 4 provinces where Ottawa has applied the tax, including Manitoba, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's top court has also upheld the carbon pricing law as constitutional. The Supreme Court of Canada is to hear that province's appeal of the ruling in December. Ontario now also says it will be appealing today's ruling.
Well, the federal election is only 4 months away, and one party that wants to run is causing concern.
CBC News has learned the RCMP is investigating the leader of the Canadian Nationalist Party for alleged hate crimes. Dave Seglin's now with details.
Toronto last weekend during gay pride celebrations. Extremists from the political left and right got into a brawl at the downtown Eaton Centre. In the middle of it all, white T-shirts, supporters of the Canadian Nationalist Party, in on the action, attracting this watchdog.
The Canadian Nationalist Party is, in fact, a hate group.
He's filed complaints with police, claiming that one of the party's online videos is hate speech and anti-Semitic.
Everywhere these people go, they infiltrate the media, they hijack the central bank, remove these people once and for all from our country.
The kind of tropes that Jews have been subject to for much of our collective lives has been exactly the words used by Mr. Patron in this video. Controlling the media, controlling the entertainment business.
The Canadian Nationalist Party is Christian-based and anti-immigrant, according to its website. Elections Canada has given its leader until mid-July to submit 250 signatures, all it takes to become an official political party.
It's my hope that we can also begin issuing tax receipts.
Can you imagine if neo-Nazi organizations and hate organizations such as the Canadian Nationalist Party are able to give charitable receipts as a political party? That scares the living daylights out of me.
He says Elections Canada should ban them.
Now, CBC News has learned that the RCMP has launched an investigation and called in hate crime specialists. The party's leader insists he's done nothing wrong and says that his members follow a code of conduct.
You will not incite violence, you will not use hateful language, and you will address professionally.
This expert says there's little stopping an extremist group if it wants to run in an election.
They have to have a certain number of signatures. But after that, it is not Elections Canada's job to decide who or who should not become a political party.
The Canadian Nationalist Party says it has more than enough signatures and expects to be approved by midsummer. Now, Elections Canada says neither the police investigation nor the group's extreme views prohibit it from being eligible for official status in time for this fall's federal election. Dave Seglin, CBC News, Toronto.
When the House of Commons rose last week for the usual summer break, it was likely a final farewell for more than 40 MPs who have decided not to run for another term.
Parliament won't likely sit again until after the October election. The CBC's Rosemary Barton rounded up 3 of those MPs to find out how they looked at their time in office.
I thought about it a long time, Rosie, because the honor of serving, right, representing people, the place I represent, Northern BC, the stuff going on there, the incredible people, that all stacks up on one side. And I honestly, struggling with it for a few years, couldn't figure out how to make it sustainable. Couldn't figure out how to look my kids or my wife in the eye and say, I got this, I'm full heart, full mind, I can do both these things. And I can do them to the level that I want to do them at. I think the next election is going to actually be really interesting. I think most of them are, but this one in particular, I can't tell who's going to win and what formation. And I think election night's going to be awesome on your network. You know, no, really. I think you're going to have to wait till BC votes. I think it's not going to be one of those ones where you get to call it an hour into the show, and then just to be somebody watching, not directly implicated. I'm actually. Is it bad to say I'm looking forward to it a little bit?
It's not bad.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be great.
You can watch Rosemary Barton's candid conversation with retiring MP Roger Cuzner, Alex Nuttall, and Nathan Cullen on The National. That's 9 p.m. on CBC News Network and 10 p.m. on CBC Television, or of course online, cbc.ca/The National.
Well, if you're thinking of making up the Grouse Grind once is impressive, wait till you meet Wilfrid LeBlanc. He just set a new record on the popular trail. We'll bring you his story right after the break. Yeah, it's really relevant here in Metro Vancouver.
I'm calling from CBC Vancouver News.
There are so many stories in this city to tell and to explore.
Are you available for an interview?
Our listeners deserve an explanation.
That's just anecdotal.
It's really the perfect place to live.
The fact that people come from all over and want to make a home here, that says a lot about the city.
Well, a 57-year-old man in Vancouver has set a new record at the Grouse Grind, climbing the famous trail, 19 times in 19 hours.
Yeah, for Wilfred LeBlanc, it was about setting a new record. He was competing to raise money for BC's Children's Hospital Foundation, so up and up he climbed, along with a few tram rides back down, of course. LeBlanc says the key was to take it one ascent at a time.
I thought, okay, I'll get to 9, and then it depends on how I feel at 9. If I'm starting to feel really tired at 9, I know I'd be in big trouble, and I felt good. And then at 16, I kind of thought maybe 19 was possible, and I had 3 left, and I started going probably too fast. Why, I don't know. Just I kind of wanted to get it out of the way.
Well, he may be tired, but it's all for a good cause. He raised $57,000 for the foundation. Wow. As for, I guess the group raised $57,000. As for LeBlanc, he went for a 27-kilometer run 2 days later. Wow.
That's awesome. Awesome.
We can all learn a little bit from that.
Yes. Well, a year after captivating the country with the search for an appropriate name, Elon the Muskox is once again charming Canadians. At 3 meters high, Elon the Muskox is 3 times the size of a real animal. His first winter coat last year was a rugged mass of northern grass, but now that it's warmed up, he's sporting a more colorful, shaggy shawl.
After a national online competition, the towering bison was named after tech titan Elon Musk. That name beat out hundreds of suggestions, including Medaya and Muskie McMuskox face.
Easy for you. Muskie McMuskox face. Oh, it's like Bodie McBoatface, I guess.
Yeah, something like that.
All right, you can always find this news program online at cbc.ca/BC.
Our next news is right here with Dan Bird after the National. Have a good weekend.
Great Canada Day weekend.